Lesson 4, Video 2. Okay, we are going to continue with Government Microeconomic Intervention, Chapter 8, and we are going to look at the summary of government failure overall. So the first one that you will see here is the market failure relating to labor market. Okay, so if you notice, there are three columns that I put over here. So the first one is causes of labor market failure. So I merely summarize this so that you are able to pick the points. And then the second column is types of government intervention that we have actually explained very thoroughly and via your presentation as well. And then at the end, we are going to evaluate how effective the government policy would be. Okay, so this is the flow of this lecture. Right, so let's look at the first part here, causes of labor market failure. So I merely put in several important points to indicate labor market failure. Okay, so the first one to indicate failure would be mobility of labor. All right, when we talk about mobility of labor, then we see that many workers are occupationally and geographically immobile. So in reality, there are so many people who are unable to move around because they're tied up with family and they have settled down their houses, okay, and all sorts of other things around them. Okay, so that's why it's very difficult for them to actually move to other places. Okay, so that implies labor market failure. So the identification here is to look at a failure where government would have certain policies to try to improvise the situation. Now the second cause would be skill shortages. So we know in a number of countries there are always lack of education and training, okay, in normally less developed and developing nations even. Okay, so then it is a sign of labor market failure that needs to be solved by the government. All right, the third one would be trade union and monopoly employers. So we have seen this before where trade union exists, then trade union would ask for higher wages, and if they're very powerful under this monopoly market, so you look at bilateral monopoly last time, then we are able to see that with a powerful trade union and with a powerful employer, they are trying to bargain among them. Then at the end, if the trade union is more powerful, then we know at one point it will create unemployment. Okay, so then again, if there is a rising unemployment in the economy, then it needs to be solved by the government. Okay, the fourth cause would be segmented labor markets. Okay, so what we are seeing over here is that there are workers who are better paid and benefit more in formal markets rather than informal ones. So again, I believe that you have done some sort of presentation on this part where we are able to see that if workers are registered formally, normally they are paid accordingly and they're more secured in their position as an employee compared to for those who are hired by their families informally. So they tend to be paid lower. Okay, so then this is also a sign of labor market failure that needs to be solved. And finally, another major cause that you could see across the markets would be discrimination in terms of race or gender or even ability. Okay, so this also has been highlighted in the previous semester relating to different groups of people where they tend to earn lesser pay compared to others. For example, among men and women. Okay, so they tend to be paid in different level, however same or equal their skills are, okay, with each other, right? So then again, it is a sign of market failure. So let's take a look of the types of government intervention that we have highlighted before. So what you see here is the minimum wage legislation. So you know what happens there. So minimum wage legislation would be one of the major government intervention in labor market. Another one is equal pay legislation. So again, we have detailed this out. So I'd just like you to see in summary here, okay, what we have been doing before. And the other one that we have mentioned also is health and safety legislation, where there will be certain standard that need to be abide, okay, where government impose certain rules so that to protect uh, the employees, okay. So, and of course, other employment protection measures. Okay, so you are able to revise that in under 10. Okay, so I put down the page over here. And the one I'm adding over here is also intervention in terms of government reducing power of the trade union. So Malaysia is one of the countries that also control the trade union position in the market. Okay, so that they are not going to be too powerful and make their own bargain until it affects the government policy. All right. So now, okay, how effective is this? Okay, so let's put down the third column, the critics against the government. So we could see based on certain case studies that we have earlier that overall it is a partial success. Well, as much as it is partially done, uh, at least we could see there's some improvement, okay, across different markets. But then again, it does create even bigger inequalities for some countries as unemployment increase. Okay, but this is probably meant only for individual markets. Okay, when we see individual markets, we are looking at individual industry. Okay, for example, if you talk about manufacturing versus agricultural industry or even banking industry, so uh, it is only meant for just a particular market, right? So it is not seen as a global or national issue when it comes to inequality. Okay? So normally service industry tend to become in a better position when it comes to government policy like this, where the one that is mostly affected uh, here and there would be normally manufacturing sector. Okay, where, for example, let me give an example. If government were to reduce the power of trade union, for example, government has to actually bear the case that people in manufacturing sector would have lower pay. So in that sense, government has to impose policies like minimum wage legislation. But when it comes to that, that would be another problem like putting too much budget trying to help out these people. Okay, so then again, overall, it's a partial success. Okay, another critics against the government policy would be high cost to small firms. Well, if government would try to impose minimum wage legislation, this could be done or could be followed probably by bigger firms. Okay, smaller firms they can't afford to do so because increased wages means increased cost of production. So that's why it is very difficult for small firms to survive if they were to follow government order in this sense. Okay. And finally, I put over here, it does little to reduce poverty. So trying to help all these employees based on all this intervention does not necessarily mean that we reduce poverty because majority of the households with workers do not benefit directly from the minimum wage. Okay, because well, remember we have informal sector and we also have certain industries that it's difficult for government to impose even minimum wage okay, because they might be paid by the hour. They are not paid in terms of monthly, where government minimum wage probably is a monthly session. So it is not an overall thing okay, for every industry. Some industries might be affected, especially the informal ones. Yeah. All right. So that's basically about labor market failure. So if you were to write an essay on this, you have to highlight on the evaluation on the government part every time. Okay. All right. Next will be the market failure that we have seen before, externalities. This has been seen in chapter 6. So again, I am putting 3 columns here. All right, so you could see types of externalities, the two that we have mentioned much earlier last semester, where we have positive externalities and also negative externalities. Okay, remember the types, okay, of positive externalities. Producer on producer, producer on consumer. Remember that? producer, consumer on producer, and consumer on consumer. So same thing with negative externality. Okay, so I do hope that you're able to revise those topics back. So what kind of government intervention that we had before? So for positive externalities, we have highlighted two major ones, which are direct provision and subsidies. Okay, so I hope you remember the diagrams to go with it for subsidies. And for negative externalities, we know that government would impose certain regulation like putting on tax. Okay, so this is direct intervention in the market. And what tax is concerned, then it would raise the price and make it less affordable, and also uh, reduce the quantity consumed, okay, and reduce the quantity produced. Okay, so it will go to the socially optimum level of output. Okay, remember that. Okay, search for it, please. Okay, and then we have another policy that government use, which is tradable pollution permits, where those people or those producers who are given this permission to pollute, okay, then are able to trade their permits if they're able to reduce the pollution at certain level. Okay, next will be extended property rights. Remember, I mentioned an example like Petronas last time, where they are responsible in caring for the environment around the area. Okay, the oil rig that they have constructed in certain area in the sea. So then to actually reduce the cost of the government. Okay, and another types of government intervention would be total ban, okay, on certain products like drugs. And then we have a number of regulations that we have mentioned much earlier. Okay, so look for them. Now, the critics overall against this government policy, okay, on this intervention on externalities. Okay, the first one relating to positive externalities. The critics say there are too much government expenditure. Of course, with subsidies. Okay? Sometimes government might over subsidize certain areas, thus reduce spending on other areas. We're looking at opportunity cost here. Okay, so the budget put to one sector will affect the budget to another sector. Well, that will always be the case, okay, for the government. Where negative externalities is concerned, then again, the critics against the government would be a question of how much to tax, how much tax should be raised to internalize the cost. Well, if the damage to the environment is so bad, let's say you're talking about pollution, air pollution, where it produces haze in the economy and it affects so many people uh, in the whole economy. And that would be very expensive because people have to manage their health. They have to pay for all these hospital bills if they fall sick, with all this asthmatic disease and other diseases, okay, lung diseases, okay, due to breathing this dangerous air, I must say, okay, or polluted air. Okay, so then question, the major thing here is question of how much tax is enough to internalize the cost. Okay, it is quite uncertain there because the government might overtax or even undertax. Right, so this is something, well, government still need to do it, but again, it's always a question of how much to tax. Okay? Another critics definitely would be on corruption practices. Okay, so corruption may undermine the whole process. Okay, there will be lobbying by big businesses, big industry players there, okay, where they pollute the environment, but they are able to influence the government in such a way they are paying probably less fine, or they are paying some of the government officials and uh, be allowed to pollute. So this is something which is very much happening to many developing nations. So corruption is very bad. All right, the next critics, of course, is retaliation from the producers. Well, you notice, let's say if the government were to tax these people, okay, so then these people are not able to produce so much. At the end, it will go back to the government because it would reduce government tax revenue overall because production falls. Production falls means profit falls. If profit falls, then of course government will not be able to collect more revenue from that. Okay. Another, well, the major critics would be then the retaliation itself. Okay, then the next one relating to the socially optimum output level. Well, again, in theory, we can show it via diagram, but in reality, how can you tell a socially optimum output level? It's non-existent. Okay, it's very much uncertain, but it is a good guideline for the government to actually monitor certain activity, especially when it involves negative externality. So then they should be able to reduce the production and therefore reduce consumption if it does damage the whole society. It does bring all these welfare laws to the society. Okay, but to go to exactly the social optimum level of output is too ideal because we know the market itself is imperfect, so it's very difficult or even impossible to achieve this. Okay, and finally, increase government expenditure. Okay, so this is very common. There should be enforcement on all the types of intervention that government has imposed on all these employers. Okay, so it does increase administrative costs overall. Yeah. Okay, as much as the some parts that government may allow to for the employers to internalize the cost, but there are other costs which involve all this enforcement, okay, the administration to monitor the process, okay, of implementing such policies. All right. Okay, so that's a summary for externalities. Now we move on to the next part where market failure relating to the existence of the monopolies. Okay, well, you know what monopolies are, yeah? So activities of monopolies, in summary, would be they are restricting output because they're big. Okay, they overprice. They could practice predatory pricing. They tend to also practice limit pricing, and they also practice price discrimination. Okay, so these are activities of monopolies. So what are the types of government intervention we have mentioned last time? We have anti-monopoly policy. Remember, okay, we have regulations to control monopoly, so check that out. We have fair return pricing. So I showed you the regulated monopoly diagram where the monopoly at the end would have to be forced to reduce the price and increase output in such a way that they're able only to achieve normal profit, where average cost is equal to average revenue. And we have this marginal cost pricing, where this is allocated to efficient level, where the monopoly again is forced to reduce the price much lower and increase the output. In such a way, the price equals to marginal cost. Okay, and this is also known as socially optimal pricing. Okay, so the critics against the government in imposing all this. Okay, the first one may involve conflict of interest. What sort of conflict of interest? In one way, government needs to regulate the monopoly. In another way, government would like to gain the tax revenue because if they allow this to happen to the monopoly, if the monopoly is regulated, then government might be losing its revenue. Okay, so this is a kind of critics against the government. And also another part here would be the regulated monopoly. Well, monopoly is a big business people, okay? Big players in the market. They tend to influence the government a lot. All right. Remember we talked about regulatory capture earlier, where it's a sign of government failure. So in that sense, government would fail. They're able to be influenced by all these big industry players. Okay. Normally, they tend to have that influence. Yeah. So then that is a big critique against the government. Okay, the next one is when trying to correct monopoly, it may lead to greater inefficiency. Okay, in what way? I put over here increased competition could bring about greater market failure. Example, it may produce negative externalities. Okay, you're trying to not allowing monopoly. Because correcting monopoly, one way here is to promote more competition. Remember, we talked about merger policy. Some big firms can merge, but not until they become a monopoly. So in that sense, there must be a kind of competition in the industry itself. Okay, But what happened is they're competing for resources. They're trying to manage their costs. Everyone is trying to reduce their per unit costs as much as they can. But it may be at the expense of the environment. Okay, so negative externalities may happen, which is another type of market failure. Okay, so that is again a conflict. All right, trying to solve one will affect another one. Okay, and finally, we're talking about government can over subsidize. All right, so in this part, we're trying to achieve socially optimal pricing. Remember when the monopoly incurring losses. So then government has to over subsidize, okay, to make sure these firms survive, but at the same time producing more output, okay, to achieve this allocative efficient level. Okay, but then of course, if there is over subsidization on one particular firm, then of course it will be a huge opportunity cost, okay, for other sectors of the economy, right? So I hope you're able to understand that part, okay, why there are critics against the government when they try to impose policy on the monopoly itself. Okay, finally, the next one will be the inequality in income and wealth distribution. So this is again another form of market failure. So the cause of income inequality. So the first cause would be earning income because you're looking at someone earning higher than the other, and there would be unemployment and also retirement that would actually cause income inequality. Physical and financial wealth, that's another where some are wealthier than others, where government policy involved, again, there are people who are favored compared to other people. A household composition, again, looking at one household with more children compared to another household with very few children or dependents, then it might affect the income level overall, causing income inequality and the degree of competition in product markets. Okay, so degree of competition even would be affecting the income and wealth distribution overall. Yeah. Okay, types of government intervention. So we have seen this before. Let me just go quickly. Progressive taxation, we have seen this before. Unemployment benefits given to the groups of people, subsidies, pensions, allowance are also given out. There's direct provision, there's retraining schemes, okay, for those who are unemployed, and then there's minimum wage legislation. Okay, so how effective this policy would be? Okay, again, the critics against the government. Okay, it can be effective. We have seen how effective it is, but there are critics against the government. Okay, one, the costs are too large for the government. Yes, because government tend to give out money without expecting things in return. The next one will be the welfare losses will be larger than the welfare benefits. Okay, in what way? Because I may just say that it may not be able to reduce poverty overall. Yeah. Okay, and to the economies. Okay, because if government pay out, government would not expanding the economy so much. Because some part of the budget has to go to helping these people without any productive activities. So in that sense, there'll be future welfare loss. Okay, this is what we mean. Okay, and the economies, to the economies. Economic growth will increase if taxes are low. Yes. Okay, because when people have more income, then they tend to grow. Okay, they are able to spend more, then economy would grow. And if regulation to private sectors is minimum. So to the economies, regulation may just hinder certain growth, okay, especially in the private sector part. Okay. And finally, the next one will be wealth generated from high economic growth trickle down to the less fortunate. Okay, so this one seems good actually. Okay, so the wealth generated from high economic growth by right should be trickled down to the less fortunate, but in a lot of sense it doesn't. Okay, so let me just add that. Okay, so then it becomes a critic then. Okay, and finally the high tax will just be a disincentive to work. We have seen this before as well, because where tax is concerned, then it will be disincentive to effort for certain groups of people. Okay, so that's a summary. You can raise question when we see you in class later. Yeah. All right. So your task for all this, okay, will be seen in Anderton. Okay, I pick up mostly from Anderton here. Well, it's basically the readings that you have to do. Okay, so I hope you're able to present. It's not too long an article, okay, but they are good to summarize the whole idea. Okay, so I hope you're able, on your part, you're able to do it in group. Yeah. So there are key items here that I posted over here. The first one would be a reading on government failure and environmental policy. So it's very specific. Then we have the distribution of income and wealth in the UK. So this is a case study. So it is good to read. And finally, there's a redistributive policy in the UK. Since we are using a UK economy as an example, then it is good to actually read out the ones in Anderton. All right. Okay. So that's it. So for the next class, please look at this video, try to digest what I'm doing, okay, and look at all these readings, okay. So please delegate among you so that we are able to present it on the next class that I see you, okay. All right, so that's the end of the lesson today, guys. So it's about 26 minutes, okay, not too much, but I have exceeded the time anyway. All right, thank you for watching and listening. Bye. Assalamualaikum.